factory. Let's have a Play-Doh party. Yeah! A shooting star.
You can have a Play-Doh party anytime with the Play-Doh Fun Factory.
I made spaghetti. Fire! Make a hose. No, it's a snake. I want your spaghetti. He got the spaghetti.
By yourself or with the gang, you can have a Play-Doh party.
It's fun.
The Play-Doh Fun Factory toy comes with everything you see here.
Ghostbusters!
Spangler, this lab is spooky. Vankerman, nip ahead. It's full speed ahead. What an eyeful. Let's split. Great car. Yikes, it's Highway Hunter.
The real Ghostbusters, each sold separately.
Supernatural! Now you can join the battle between brave Lionheart and evil Skull and their eerie ghostlings.
Lion, you're dying. Now, Master.
They change to fight with ghostly might. Turn them into the light, and they change into even more powerful creatures.
Now, the lion in me is free. Take this.
Supernaturals. Lionheart, Skull, and Ghostling sold separately. New from Tonka.
Wampa!
Hot Wampa Cave. Look's inside. It connects to Hot Iron Cannon.
Introducing Hoth World, 3 playsets in 1, new from Star Wars Micro Collection line. 19 die-cast figures and action poses included.
Closed doors. Race tower. Activate iron cannon. Connected to Hot generator attack. Scoutwalkers hit. Target generated. The world of Hot is now. Yeah!
Hoth World from Star Wars Micro Collection line. Playsets also sold separately, figures included, new from Kenner.
Protect space from all evil.
Hot Wing brakes too. Gyro too.
Figures with weapon birds sold separately.
Now with Steel Will they face Evil Monster and Sky Shadow. Attack! Stronghold! Brandon! Power Wings! Out! Stop! I've got Steelheart and Razor! No way! Out! Still win! Never!
Steel Will with Stronghold, Monstar with Sky Shadow, and other figures with weapon birds sold separately. Silverhawks, new from Kenner.
Enter the world of Voltron, where thrilling adventures let you soar beyond the limits of your imagination. Where the valiant Voltron force merges together in their robotic lions to challenge the might of King Zarkon's demonic minions and menacing machines. You can join this never-ending battle between the army of evil and the champions of justice, with the fate of planet Aris and the entire universe at stake. Voltron action figures, lions, and vehicles each sold separately from Panache Place.
Cobra can run, but he can't hide. The G.I. Joe Crusader's hot on his trail. Nobody beats G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe Crusader. Cobra is shaking with fear. Crusader's gonna blast him from the stratosphere. Gotcha!
Launch the Avenger.
The Crusader and Avenger are one tough team.
Gear down.
Awesome. Nobody beats G.I. Joe, a real American hero.
Crusader comes with pilot and Avenger.
Yo, Joe!
Sold separately.
Ghostbusters!
Careful, Janine, this airport's haunted. Wow, great plane.
It's air sickness.
Run for it.
Hey, mister, how about a lift?
This wicked wing.
The real Ghostbusters, each sold separately.
What will the future bring from Nintendo? More hits like The Legend of Zelda. Sports hits like ice hockey. Nintendo has the most video game hits like Hogan's Alley and Donkey Kong Classics, and more like Excite Bike and RC Pro-Am. And you can play them only on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now you're playing with power.
It's here. The E.T. board game. Now you can pretend to help E.T. go home.
Danger.
Sometimes you can hide.
You're safe, E.T.
And sometimes you can fly.
Wow.
Now the communicator's ready.
E.T. phone home. To the spaceship.
The one that helps E.T.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, thank you for joining us on this inaugural episode of We Grew Up Better. I know the title sounds a little bit snobbish, but it's just a fact of life, honestly. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you grew up better than everybody that's grown up now. I think that's a non-debatable fact, and I'll die on that hill. But regardless, joining me, as always, will be Jordan and Adam of Complete Geek TV. Gentlemen, how are you guys doing?
We're doing great. How are you?
Fantastic, dude. That ET commercial was incredible.
That was awesome.
I need to get that puzzle.
I was about to say, you didn't know a lot of people probably didn't even know that board game existed, number one. But number two, you didn't know you needed it until you saw it.
No.
And those are my
Sometimes you
favorite
can
type
fly.
I know. But not off your roof, kids. Not off your roof. You know,
that was
because
good.
I mean, a lot of us jumped off the roof
the
moment we saw something like Superman with Christopher Reeves or something like that.
I was that kid that got a cape for Christmas, and my grandma came up to me very quietly, Jordan, you know you can't actually fly with this, right? I'm like, I know, Grandma.
Watch me, Grandma.
But I am going to jump off the table and things a little bit lower than the roof.
Yeah. How dare you doubt me? Mom said I can do anything if I put my heart to it. So,
but have you ever put a sheet over yourself, acted like a ghost, then got into a bicycle basket and acted like ET and tried to fly off the roof?
Nope,
not try that.
Not in that.
Okay,
that seems way too problematic, unfortunately. Anyways, topic of tonight is Team Sega versus Team Nintendo. This was, the age-old schoolyard question. Basically, if you move to a new city, new school, something like that, that was literally one of the first questions the kids were going to ask you. And depending on your answer, you may be shunned for the rest of your, childhood, or you may be immediately enveloped with the rest of the cool kids. Brothers and sisters fought tremendously over this. Households were divided. Team Sega versus Team Nintendo. But before we start with that, let's flash back all the way to the beginning, and I'll go ahead and say very first home console I ever had, very first experience was the Atari 2600. My dad used to manage an electronics store, and he brought one of those home for himself because he thought, video games were cool back then because they were so new. Atari 2600 was, some amazing feat of technology. So I got his hand-me-down Atari 2600 when I was like 5 or 6. And luckily it's very simple, just one button and a joystick. So a 5-year-old can figure that out. But after that was the Nintendo Entertainment System. Swept the nation by storm. Nintendo had 95% market share of video games as a whole, which is absolutely insane to think about anything having that much dominance in any kind of product category. But Christmas 1990, Grandma and Grandpa gave my parents money to buy me a Nintendo Entertainment System, and put their name on it under the tree. So for Mom and Dad, but years later I found out Mom and Dad was broke as hell, and Grandma and Grandpa are the ones that really bought that. But that was my first home console experience, truly, that was mine, was the Nintendo Entertainment System. How about you guys?
You go ahead.
Okay. So the memory that stands out the most for me when it comes to like Nintendo or Sega, I remember my grandma used to babysit kids. So she had a Nintendo system at her house. And anytime we went over, I played. My cousin, who was my best friend growing up, he had a Nintendo system. And I was always excited. But I remember I didn't have one right away. And I believe it was when I was like 5 or 6. I wanted a Sega so bad because someone, I think it was one of my uncles, was like, well, the Sega has better graphics. And, as a 6-year-old, you understand that. Right?
Sold. Yeah. You're sold.
I don't know what that means.
That's right. I can tell people at the playground that right
but
there.
You said the word better. So I want a Sega, and I wanted a Sega so bad. And I remember that Christmas specifically, we used to always go over to my grandma's house Christmas Eve, and my dad was a firefighter. So he was going to be at the station on Christmas Day. So my mom was like, hey, we're going to have Christmas the day after Christmas, and was like, we already talked to Santa. He knows we're not going to
you made a special exception.
He said it was okay. He can bring it the next night. And we were like, okay, as kids, it's like with your dad being a fireman, that's just kind of how it is sometimes. We're like, okay, that's fine. Well, anyway, we're over at my grandma's house. We get home Christmas Eve to go to bed. And we walk through the door and there's presents under the tree. And we're like, what? And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, my parents were with me this whole time at my grandparents' house. I mean, I think because of that day, I believed in Santa longer than most kids ever.
It's all a year ago, is that right?
I still just, I still to this day am sometimes like, there's things that happened in my life that I just, I'm still not fully convinced. Like, but anyway, I just remember being so excited. And of course, I walk over to the tree. One of the first presents I see, I'm just like, that's got to be Sega. You open it up and it is. And
it's a Sega-shaped box, even though it's just a rectangle.
Yes,
like
but you knew what it was. But I just remember playing Aladdin and Sonic, and a game called Bob, just all night for the next 10 years of my life, and never sleeping. Just that's all I wanted to do after that point.
My first one was an NES, and it's funny because at the time it was a family gift. We had. I was a family of 4 siblings. So like at the time I was the youngest to where I wasn't even sure what that was that much at the time. It was just kind of like,
box.
Yeah, check this out. I'm like, yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. High fiving, but saw Mario was in there, played it at Pizza Hut, was, it was, so we were excited, but yeah, that was obviously the life-changing event to unfold, but yeah.
In hindsight, looking back, I'm fairly certain the reason my parents / grandparents, conspired to get a Nintendo for me. It was cheap babysitting. Like, this is back in the day where, how do I put this eloquently? Child endangerment wasn't necessarily such a concern. Like, everyone played with lawn darts and drank out of a garden hose and, went out to their friend's house. And the only rule was like, come home when the street lights come on type of thing. So like my parents were A-okay with leaving me in the house for like, 8 hours at a time and just saying, hey, there's something in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
You can
it's
eat.
Not a monthly fee. You just pay it one time. It's done.
And once
don't leave the house, play your Nintendo, watch your cartoons, and be good.
And with the Nintendo in there, they probably won't leave the house.
Yeah, and sure enough, and I was that kid. I was like, all right, fine. So I vegged out and just stared into the abyss that is the CRT TV, sitting way too close, so I could get that full immersive experience of all 8 bits. But yeah, Nintendo's where I started, but I was quickly becoming a Sega convert as, the schoolyard wars kicked up, so to speak, because everyone I knew had some sort of experience with Nintendo, whether they had one, their older brother had one, there was a Nintendo in everybody's house. But Sega initially was a slow burning type of thing. And I always tell people I've always been like one generation behind as far as the home consoles. So I didn't get a Sega until 1991, which isn't necessarily late. I mean, it came out in 89, but Sega didn't really start picking up steam until around like 91, 92, when Tom Kalinske started really changing the gears of how things operated. So I got on a little bit early, I say a little bit early, a little bit late with the Genesis, in that it was 2-year-old console at that time. Super Nintendo had just came out in 1990, was not even on my radar. Like, I was like, I'm still enjoying the heck out of my NES console, and I know my parents aren't about to buy me another thing, because trying to explain to the parents the subtle differences between Super and regular Nintendo, that's just an absolute nightmare.
The next one is Super.
Easy.
I mean, it's in the name, Mom and Dad. They're like, what? But I could say, like, this is a completely different console in itself. And I remember the spiky haired guy is what I was just always telling my parents. Like, it's got spiky haired guy, really cool, just limited vocabulary. You can't articulate what is different about it, but somehow, some way, some shape or form, they were conned into getting me a Sega Genesis. So for my birthday, got a Sega Genesis, came with the pack-in Sonic the Hedgehog game, and I played that for a long time. That being my sole Sega Genesis game for a while, until we could find something at like a bargain bin Toys R Us clearance deal.
Was that a version 2 at that time? When did version 2?
No, it was like the OG. So like, this is a mini, but your classic, when you think of the Sega console, this is the aesthetic most people think of. Obviously they had the 3 models, and I remember being just like blown away, because like, comparison's sake, just holding these 2 mini consoles, like, this looks like a device of the 80s, and this looks like a device of the 90s. This is, I mean, it came out in 89, but like, it just looks so much newer, more advanced. It's sleek. It's got this little shiny bit on the front. It says 16-bit. I don't know what that means as a kid, other than the fact that I know this was 8-bit. 16 is a bigger number than 8, so I'm like, oh, it must be better. And like
Yeah, it
the
has to
headphone thing. I didn't even have a pair of headphones. I didn't have a pair of headphones for many years after I had this console.
But you could talk about it on the playground, right?
But I'm like, I can plug in my headphones, and the kids are like, yeah, me too. I'm like, I don't have headphones.
Okay, hold on. What's amazing about this is I didn't even know I had a headphone jack until right now.
There you go.
I don't think I ever opened that flap. I put the game in and grabbed the controller, and that was it.
Well, I mean, Sega for a long time was really trying to push the envelope with like new technology and things, trying to like, just say, hey, this is, stuff you don't know you need, but you do. Like you want this. Like you want to be able to play your game quietly before mom and dad. Because I don't know how many of you, show of hands in the chat, ever played a game, let's say maybe past your bedtime, and you got busted because of the Sega intro. Like you turn on the console, because so many of those games had that. Yeah, the Sega. You're like, oh crap, turn the volume down. I got busted more than one occasion. Yeah, more than one occasion with that.
It's worth it. It was worth it every time.
Yeah,
such an amazing intro.
Yeah,
it really was. So I kind of had that experience as well. So I will say I went from the NES to the Super Nintendo, which I still think is one of the greatest consoles, if not the greatest console of all time. But the thing was, I went over to my neighbor's house, and I'm sure a lot of us had this experience. Like my best friend had a ColecoVision, but my neighbor, who was one of my best friends, had the Sega Genesis. And then I go over there and play Mortal Kombat. I'm like, you have freaking blood in your game. I'm stuck with spit. This is not going to fly. I'm not going to play Mortal Kombat with spit.
They have a lot of spit.
I know. And I used to go to the arcade. My dad took me to the arcades a lot. And you go over there, you play Sonic, and then we're going to kind of dive into this about how the games weren't the same. Even if you had 2 Aladdins, 2 Batmans, which there's a lot of reason why you should, a case to have both, but it's not like, our parents a lot of times
I remember that
stuff. But
very specifically because I had Aladdin on Sega. Went over to my cousin's house.
Like, what the?
Went over to my cousin's house and he had Aladdin. And I'm like, I know this game. And you're like, oh no, I don't know this game.
They're both great, dude.
They are great, yeah.
But anyway, so then I got a Sega Genesis for my birthday. Ended up having both. I can't believe my parents pulled that off for me, but that was like several years later when the version 2 came out, and I was like super excited. So that's when I got my taste of going to the. If
I remember right, maybe I'm.
So they got you hooked.
Yep.
If I remember right, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. There was more than just this difference, but the main difference between Aladdin on the Sega and the Nintendo was you could actually beat the game on the Nintendo, and there were levels on the Sega that were close to impossible.
Well, I don't know. I haven't beat him. Yeah.
Well, like we kind of touched on earlier, like just the differences and the nuances between Sega and Nintendo to us childhood, kids on the schoolyard, it was a night and day difference. To the parents, absolutely, it's all the same. It's all a video game or whatever. So let's go ahead and see just how different Sega and Nintendo were, because they really ran their business 100% different than one another. Nintendo was very family friendly, very staunch by the numbers, and Sega tried that. Obviously realized that weren't really working for the American audience. Like I said, retooled things when Tom Clancy came aboard, and they really started changing how they marketed and who they marketed towards. Let's go ahead and just examine a classic NES commercial, and we can see just how different these two are.
When you get hold of the Nintendo Entertainment System, when you master Rob, the video robot, and meet the challenge of Gyrobites, when you shoot the light-sensing zapper, when you play the system with so many arcade hits, you're playing with power. The Nintendo Entertainment System Deluxe Set. Batteries not included, Super Mario Brothers, and other games sold separately.
All right, so first thing I want to mention is how disappointing Rob the Robot.
I know, yeah. That commercial made it look pretty sweet right there.
Yeah, I mean, that's marketing 101. You upsell and you get, excitement and hype for the product and everything. And as a kid, you're watching that and you're like, oh my God, that's the greatest thing since anything. Mom, we got to go to Toys R Us now. We got to get this now. We got to get this now.
And did you ever play games in a thunderstorm like that?
Yeah.
With Rob? I mean, I guess that's part of the experience.
I mean, common occurrence here in the Midwest with the thunderstorms and everything like that.
Yeah.
So that was
I'm sure
that was the extent of a Nintendo Entertainment sizzle reel, so to speak. Everything else, for the most part, was a little more laid back, a little more even kill. Genesis was a little bit different.
Genesis does.
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
16-bit sports action.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis does.
Get Joe Montana free, Pat Riley free, Buster Douglas free, Super Monaco GP free, or Columns free.
What Nintendo?
Buy a 16-bit Genesis system between now and October 31st and get an extra.
That's
So yeah,
fantastic music.
I mean, that's the classic, tagline. Genesis does what Nintendo don't. Sega was always going for the jugular. I mean, they were going right after Nintendo, making no qualms about it. And again, this is hearkening back to the statement earlier: 95% market share when Sega tried to start the fight, so to speak, with Nintendo. I mean, that's a ballsy task to start picking away at Nintendo and making all these television and magazine ads, calling them out directly. I mean, they've got a bigger marketing budget than your entire, operational budget is. So I mean, it's a ballsy task, but it slowly started to work.
It did, dude. And I have to give props to that voice actor on the Sega Genesis one, where he's just like, you can pick Joe Montana football or one of these games. That guy was fantastic. I don't know who that was, but
were you getting all of those for free with that?
Well, that was the thing. That was another thing. Like they were not shy about throwing in pack-in titles and really truly giving you that like bang for your buck. Where Nintendo's like, all right, we'll give you Rob the Robot that works with one game that does nothing else, and we'll give you some zappers and some controllers.
They were trying to do Game Pass way before Xbox.
Exactly. I mean, they were throwing all sorts of stuff at you. They got one of their best titles, Sonic the Hedgehog, because originally Sega Genesis was shipping with Altered Beast, which good arcade game, but not necessarily the most marketable title, specifically across North America for the Bible Belt specifically. They look at that game and they're like, it's the devil's game. Versus little cute blue spiky haired hedgehog. Easy to sell that to mom and dad. So they definitely took things in the right direction and started trying to market towards the older demographic as well, whereas Nintendo specifically with their NES stuff was, hey, we're going to go for ages 6 to 12, and Sega's like, all right, we'll go 12 and up, because no one's even caring about those people.
I mean,
that's true. It definitely felt like a more mature system for sure.
I mean, it's interesting because in the long run, I think a lot of people still see Nintendo as the more kids console.
I mean, to this day, it's probably a stigma that they leaned on purposely, number one, but it is something that's followed them all the way into the current console generations. This was
working well, so
yeah. I mean, it was most evident when Mortal Kombat came to the console. So when Super Nintendo and Sega both released simultaneously, Nintendo decided after lots of internal debate that they wanted to censor the game, so they took away some fatalities. They turned the blood green because why? And it shot. It backfired completely. The Genesis version outsold the SNES version 5-1, and Nintendo absolutely took a bath and lost big on that gamble and had a horrible reputation and basically started kind of becoming the laughing stock of the schoolyard. At least that was my experience. What about you guys?
Yeah, that was a bad move on the Mortal Kombat. Like to just look like spit or sweat coming off the person, because I was just like, what? And like I said, went to the buddy's house. I was like, nope. Now I got to rebuy it.
I know. It was like, it wasn't like it was really any worse of a game. It was like,
I know. That's just how the arcade version is. And it always bugs you.
Let's make it green. That's not as graphic.
Yeah. No, but that's the thing too. So, I mean, especially now,
they're
like
aliens, you're not hurting people.
Yeah. No, like even looking back though, it's like we'll kind of dive into this, but like really with the Genesis, it was really kind of the arcade console in my opinion. It had such amazing arcade games on there. There's also a game on there that I love, Comic Zone, which I still absolutely love till this day. But there was just it had Streets of Rage. Some of the just kind of beat 'em up style games were fantastic, but I appreciated the Super Nintendo, for instance, for like some of the JRPGs, but wow, do I love the Genesis for just the arcade ports on there.
And I think that's kind of something that I experience with all my friends and like the talk of the town type of thing is each system and brand kind of started being known for a certain niche. Like I was a Sega kid at this point. I kind of, like I said, I went to the Sega Genesis, didn't get the Super Nintendo until my college years. Played it at a friend's house, still got to experience it or whatever, but I was full on Sega, kept the NES, enjoyed it still, but I was only buying Sega games at that point. Sega was the reputation in my area for being the sports game and the fighting game, you know, like the Mortal Kombat. So your NFL, your NHL, all those type of games, you want a Sega for that. Other games like RPGs, you wanted the Super Nintendo, and I fully kind of like agreed with that. Like I'd go over to a friend's house and we'd play Final Fantasy or Phantasy Star or something like that. I'm like, yeah, this game's amazing. I'm like, Sega's got Shining Force, which is all right, but it wasn't anywhere on par with that. And then the same vein is like, hey, let's play this version of the game that's on Genesis that is also inferior. So it's like,
No, so did you have a 32X or Sega CD or Saturn?
I had all of the above at some point.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, at some point I finally did. But like I said, going back to that always being like slightly a generation behind. So by the time people were moved on to the PlayStation, I had bought a Sega Saturn on, you know, like the markdown bin. Same thing with a 32X. Got it for $49.99 in a markdown bin type of thing. But that was the interesting kind of difference between Sega and Nintendo was the Genesis had like a much longer lifespan because they threw on all these added peripherals, the 32X, the Sega CD, the Sonic and Knuckles cartridges, all the little peripheral add-ons. Whereas Nintendo's like, all right, we're doing the NES, we're doing the Super NES, we're doing Nintendo 64. There was much more defined life cycles. Whereas here in America, specifically, Sega and the Genesis was like, all right, let's milk this for everything we can and make it last as long as possible.
Yeah, but I had the Sega CD, and I remember being kind of confused when I got it. It's weird because I don't remember when or how I got it. I think it might have been like a birthday where I like asked everyone for money and saved up, or I might have gotten it from my parents. I don't really specifically remember. I just knew I had a Sega CD eventually at some point, and I remember opening that thing up and being like, "Okay, so you attach this to you put this thing together, I mean,
it was confusing.
It was so cool, but like,
and in our minds, probably cartridges are like tapes, right? And then you're like, now it's got CDs, but then you're like, it's still 16-bit, but it's better.
In some way, shape, or form.
I appreciate it actually now. At the time, I was pretty confused too.
The Sewer Shark game, and you're like, whoa, it's playing real movies too?
Well, that was the thing. Like, it was real movies to us at the time, but looking back, it's like, you know, 240p pixelated. It looks like, you know, you're having a Skype call with somebody that's in the middle of the Sahara Desert as far as the reception quality, things like that. But I mean, like you said, it was that transference of cartridge to disc that was in itself a mind-blowing experience. I still remember the very first time I even like got to see what a CD-ROM was. I was over at a friend's house that was much, you know, more well off than my family. And they had a personal computer. I'm like, who has a computer? You know, like to me, you know, a Sega Genesis or a Nintendo, that's a computer, you know. But he's like, yeah, you put these, you know, these discs in, you play games. I was like, what is this?
And Oregon Trail, it's incredible.
He booted up like Commander Keen or something like that on like Windows 95. And I'm like, what is this magic?
That's hilarious.
I remember there being like when like CD copiers first came out. You didn't just do it on your computer, but you had to have like one of those like DJ things where you could record onto one like blank CD. I remember I used to try and do that all the time as a kid, just to, like, have copies of CDs, and they wouldn't play on a lot of CD players. Like I don't know why, it just wouldn't work. Like, but they almost every CD worked on the Sega CD, no matter what. It didn't matter what kind of protection or how bad it was,
because there was no copy protection on the system.
The system that Sega CD would play everything, and I used it as even way after it was like done being like supported, and you know, we had the PlayStation and all that. I used my Sega CD as a CD player for a decent amount of time, like
because you can't beat the TV speakers.
I know.
I was just kidding. No, dude. So going back to marketing for a second, I would love to hear people in the comments talk about this too, but I was for sure sold on the 32X for marketing. I just remember reading about it. I'm like, it's the first 32-bit system. You know, now it's better than both. I could get an even better version of Mortal Kombat and everything. And I asked for it for Christmas, and I was that terrible kid that went searching every nick and corner of the house for Christmas presents. And I found the 32X, and I was like, yeah. And then I go tell my brother, and then, of course, he goes and tells Dad, and he's like, Dad, Adam found the 32X. You know, I didn't know this at the time. So my dad did the old switcheroo and switched out for a PlayStation. And I remember for Christmas, I'm just like, open up, I'm like, but yeah, anyways, that ended up being a good move.
I was about to say that actually worked out all right. Yeah.
I'm not disappointed by the whole situation.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight, that's like failing upwards or whatever.
I know.
While we're still talking about Sega CD, let's go ahead and see how this Sega CD was marketed to everybody.
Hey, you still don't have a Sega CD? What are you waiting for? Nintendo to make one? You have seen the games, right? Wrong answer, man. Show them. Want to see more?
That was literally me on the marketing. That blew my mind with some of that stuff. Just like,
man, those flashes. I caught a couple glimpses of Echo the Dolphin. Did anyone ever figure out what you were supposed to do in that game? I remember playing way too much of it, and I was like, I have no idea what the point of this is.
Yeah, just a lot of going back and forth and like speed knows attacking certain things. But I'm like, it's one of those games that I was like, all right, I'm not smart enough to understand this game. It looks pretty. It plays all right, the best I can tell, but like I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Dude, I still stand by this. That's one of the coolest looking things ever to have your Sega Genesis in the Sega CD and even put the 32. Like I still think that's just one of the coolest.
Oh yeah, the quote unquote Tower of Power. Yeah. Sorry, let me assemble my miniaturized version of it.
Well, I need to get that still. I want to get that for my mini.
Yeah,
so that was like the starter kit, so to speak. Obviously, people took this to a whole nother level and started making obscene ones that were, 4 foot tall, stuff like that. But I want to highlight a comment here. It's where'd it go? Blast processing. So that was a marketing gimmick that was popping up. A lot of Sega Channel stuff. Do you know what blast processing was?
No.
Yeah. Nobody does, because it was 100% made up by Sega. Come to find out,
it's the better processing that
Nintendo it blasts.
Nintendo don't have
guns on the game. It processes it better, obviously.
But I definitely remember reading up later on in years about the blast processing advertisement by the marketing gurus at Sega at the time. They said, we just made it up. And they said they did all sorts of focus groups years later, and they were talking to kids and youths, and they're like, hey, why do you want a Sega, blah blah blah. And they would say, the cool factor, the edginess of Sonic over Mario. And then they said they had a 60% rating of kids that would mention blast processing.
I love it.
Like we knew our commercial and our marketing campaign was working exceptionally well, because we 100% made up the term blast processing. It absolutely meant nothing, but the kids, they gravitated towards it, and that's what they hung on, and that's what they told everybody at the schoolyard. Like,
it's amazing how many arguments can be won by throwing out a thing that you can't even explain what it is. Well, this is blast process. It was like, what does that mean? It's got it.
Yeah.
What else do you need to know?
Don't ask questions. Just accept the answer. Yeah.
Just don't have it. That's all you need to know.
Let's go check out some of the print advertisements of some of these companies. So like I said, Sega was always a little more edgier, always going right for the throat. So just literally calling SNES out there and saying, hey, you got 6 games. We've got all these games. Now, granted, they clearly fluffed theirs and cheated and just took out a crap ton of SNES titles. But I mean, as a kid, you're like, sold.
Yeah.
Like I said, you don't necessarily need to understand what you're seeing. You just see the pro and the con here, and you're like, oh, that's an easy win.
Yeah, you rip that out. You rip that out of the magazine. You fold it up. You put it in your pocket. Playground time.
Yep.
Enough said.
Yep.
And then you start showing it.
And then you slip it in somewhere that your parents are going to see.
Oh, for Christmas. Yeah,
the Christmas list.
Yeah,
for sure.
And then Nintendo, again, just kind of doing the, hey, we make video games. we know you know that we make video games. You're going to buy it regardless because we're the biggest, baddest company out there. Like I said, they really just kind of like played it safe, played it easy, and ignored Sega for many, many years.
Dude, I mean, a whole other episode we need to do is talking. I'm not even going to go into it right now. I'm just throwing it out there for something. How many times they've made something that just worked for one game or just a short period? I mean, we have the Super Scope. We have Rob.
I was about to say, we can use Rob the Robot right there.
Yeah.
You can play Gyromite, and even then, it's like it just worked with him, but like it was a terrible game.
Power Glove.
Nintendo has done so many weird things.
I know.
And there's times it's worked, and times where when it gets brought up, you're like, oh yeah, they did have that.
Back to an early SNES magazine ad where Link to the Past. It's called Zelda 3, before they'd even changed the name.
That's hilarious.
Oh, wow.
Super Mario World, just, hey, here's our video games, here's our system, you're going to buy it type of thing. And then back to Sega being edgy,
That was me, guys. That was me right there.
Trying to garner to that more teenage and adult audience, with things like, what are those two Sega machines doing, mommy? Which is so silly.
Yeah. But again, I don't know how I just totally missed what I said there. That's fantastic.
I guess it didn't click in my mind until you just said it out loud.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of genius, Mark.
That's why my parents said
double entendre. Double entendre. Yeah.
My dad said that. We're doing the 32X tonight. I get it. Anyways, no, that's incredible. Very different. Yeah.
But one thing Nintendo definitely just absolutely killed it from start to finish, though, was the magazine, the dedicated magazine. So everybody probably is familiar with Nintendo Power. Ran from 1988 to 2012, had 285 issues. The biggest thing I remember the most was the goofy covers. Like, all the covers were just like weird clay animation or weird 3D animation and just like, not screen grabs. Clearly Photoshop was in its infancy in these early years, but like looking at this, like, Mega Man looks like he's been to the desert and eating peyote and doing all sorts of weird stuff.
Like he's one of those face filters on right now.
Exactly. And then like the inaugural issue with Mario. I mean, this literally looks like, some weird cake topper that your grandma Bessie had made for you or whatever for your
Play-Doh.
7th birthday.
Bessie, it's still impressive, okay?
Yeah, it still is, but I mean, just
I know.
You look at that, and then Sega, obviously, they always wanted to do something that Nintendo did and just do it better. So they came out with their Sega Visions magazine. Really
totally
design aesthetic.
Yeah.
Design aesthetic looked so much better, but then again, it also was its own worst enemy. It had issues coming out regularly. Nintendo Power was bi-monthly. Sega Visions was supposed to be bi-monthly, and then it got behind, and then it just had all sorts of issues. No pun intended there. But it only lasted 25 issues over 5 years. So that tells you, how many times you got it. And I can't tell you a single instance where I saw a Sega Visions magazine, like on the magazine rack at the grocery store, the comic book store, and anything. It was always Nintendo Power and other gaming magazines. But
in the long run, I bet they're worth way more if you have them in good condition.
Yeah, I mean, there's only 25 issues, so it's much easier to collect a whole Sega Visions run.
You didn't see them as much. I don't. I remember Nintendo Power, and I had a Sega, but I don't remember Sega Visions. I never bought that magazine. I don't think I knew it existed back when I was a kid.
Yeah. Well, that was another thing. Like a troublesome thing was like Nintendo, like that, going back to that market share. They had over 1 million subscribers early on to their Nintendo Power magazine. There's other video game magazines in the market. So you had Tips and Tricks and Game Informer and Game Pro and all these other ones that are competing for that market share. Nintendo's already got a big chunk of it. Sega, you're already competing with other people that are already established, and you're saying, hey, we're only going to talk about Sega. These other magazines are talking about all the consoles. So you're already kind of doing this uphill battle against not only Nintendo, but everybody else that was already in the market.
Yep.
And as we were talking about the weird peripherals, I guess this would be a nice segue, but we mentioned, the classic Tower of Power. It started to grow over the years. People are like, hey, we'll add more. And then it starts to get more and more out of hand.
Man, that's incredible.
That is an amazing
What is that
picture.
on the bottom? I can't even know what that is.
So you got like the 32X here. I want to say this is the Master Sister converter deck.
That's right.
So
okay. I didn't realize you could put that in the 32X. Okay.
Yeah, the cleaner system. The Game Genie, Sonic and Knuckles, and then Sonic 3. And there was
That's
like
hilarious.
4 other things I've seen people like add on to that as well.
What's amazing was that probably worked.
Oh, that's the thing. Like, you just plugging in chips, and for whatever reason, the way the architecture was built.
I remember being so amazed by the Sonic and Knuckles thing when I first got it, and I put in Sonic 1, and it I don't even remember, but it did something different, and I was like, wait a second. So what games?
How did they manipulate a game that already came out? Like, how does that happen?
And I started plugging in. I don't remember which ones worked, but I started plugging in every game I could into that thing to be like, what does it do? Do I get a whole new game if I plug this in? Is it
Sonic? Is it Mortal Kombat?
Does it create some weird new thing when it's put together? Yeah.
Oh yeah, dude, that's absolutely impressive.
Because I mean, the original intention of the whole Sonic and Knuckles was because Sonic 3 wasn't fully finished, right? Like Knuckles, it was supposed to be all one game. But in the long run, it almost really kind of turned into something even cooler because by adding those two things together, like I said, I was like, well, I gotta try every Sega game I can. We got to put it all in there and see what happens.
Then you're disappointed, realize it's just the.
No, there were other games.
I don't remember how many are,
there was other games, and those are weird happy accidents. But for whatever reason, it's just one of those things.
That's fantastic.
Somebody didn't turn a code off, and it works fine. Other peripherals. So this kind of
I still have that.
Again, this kind of goes back to how overblown Nintendo's marketing and merchandising was. Like every single thing in this image, except for the CRT, is a Nintendo product.
That's incredible. I want to point out I tried that on the
pants,
yeah, I know
everything.
I tried that on the Polymega and it does not work. I'm just letting everyone know.
Womp womp womp.
I know because everyone really wanted to do that on the Polymega.
So Nintendo, obviously, they weren't shy about trying to find new innovative ways to get gamers to play their games. We talked some smack on Rob the Robot. It was a cool little gimmick, but he didn't do anything. He only worked one game. The Power Pad, it's actually one of those things that worked pretty well, but extremely limited as far as its applicable nature of how many games you can play with it. I mean, it's also one of those things you quickly realize as a small child, you honestly have more fun sitting on the couch with the thumbs getting exercise than you do speed racing in your living room as fast as possibly.
Yeah. I mean,
I know carpet on a Power Pad.
I mean, Nintendo's just done that forever, but I mean, I know I'm jumping many years in the future here from technically what this is all about, but even the Wii, when it first came out, I was like, that's so cool. And I remember playing Zelda for all night one night, Twilight Princess, and was like, okay, I'm really sick of throwing my hands around to use this sword. Like, can I just plug in a controller now?
It's one of those things that sounds great in theory, and it's like the true nature of, do I really want to play an entire game like that?
Look how much fun they're having. I mean, this is real footage. This is not.
And of course, Sega, not to be outdone, tried to come up with their own version, so to speak.
I wanted this so bad.
So did I. And then it was one of the worst actual products humanly possible. If you've ever experienced this, sorry. I mean, Sega owes us all a personal, heartfelt apology and all of our money's back. The marketing for it's fantastic. All these magazine advertisements and video advertisements of you playing Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat and you actually doing the moves and it just magically working on the screen. In reality, you bought this thing. It came with a little training video that's 8 minutes long, tell you how to play it, and it tells you first and foremost to make your hands flat like this and do horizontal just chopping motions, and then you couldn't ever do things simultaneously, so you couldn't kick and punch at the same time. And you look like you're having a seizure in your living room, and your character's not doing anything except for getting absolutely destroyed because you can't react quick enough, you can't move, you can't punch, can't kick.
I really want to try one of these right now. I did not have this, but I
want it.
Go on eBay, find yourself one because I'm sure they're plentiful. You may not find one in the box, but you'll get one, and you'll have a great experience trying to play games like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter.
Okay, I like that. They become a real black belt.
Yeah,
exactly.
This was a hard sell for mom and dad. Okay, I remember I wanted this, and you're just it's hard to be check this out. They're because they've already got me the Power Glove. They're like, none of this stuff works right, and you're just like, but you can kick, and it works on these 3 games. I have all 3 of these. Nope. Did it actually light up the floor like that? I don't remember.
No,
That's
not,
what I thought.
Not that I recall. And I remember like you could actually get 2 of these, so you could do 2-player action. And imagine just like the accident, just seizure, just asking for trouble of you and your brother or somebody in the living room trying to stand arm's length away, just air fighting the bejesus out of each other, just having a good old time. I guarantee bones are broken.
I'm just
TVs were
right now
knocked off the stands.
Yeah, I was gonna say we might have a video about coming soon about like that.
Mortal Kombat, Jordan and I against each other.
Inspired me. I think I need to get 2, and we're gonna play some old Sega Mortal Kombat with them.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and then of course we already mentioned it earlier, but the Power Glove, absolutely one of the coolest concept ideas. Execution, not so much. I mean, everybody that saw this immediately wanted this. They didn't even understand how it worked. The commercial showed them playing like Mike Tyson's Punch Out and things like that. And you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. We got to have that. But honestly, when you look at it, there's programming codes. There's buttons up here that make no practical sense of how you would actually control it. So it worked for like 3 games. And when I say worked, there's strong air quotes being used there.
Yeah.
Real quick, was this a right hand? Did this go in your right hand or left hand?
You can do both.
You could do either.
Well,
it came in 2 sizes. There was like a small and large.
I was just gonna say the thing, at least the way it's showing, the buttons would be upside down. I never got to play with a Power Glove either. That was not something I was just gonna say. Well, your A and B would be backwards, just with the way it's set up right here. Unless you could flip it around.
That different left and righties.
It looked cool. It had an awesome, promo spot in the movie The Wizard, starring Fred Savage, which is literally just a glorified Nintendo movie, if we're being honest, which is fine. I absolutely loved it as a kid. But let's just check out the commercial and see how this was being, marketed to us children.
The Power Glove for your Nintendo Entertainment System. Now you and the games are one. Everything else is child's play.
Wow, do I wish it worked that way.
Yeah. I mean, some of that looks appealing, but others, like when he's playing Mario and he's doing... Like, who wants to play Mario like that?
Jump like this.
Yeah.
And
then like when he's playing, I don't even remember the racing game, but he's literally turning like his entire body.
Racer. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Punch-Out's what sold you.
Oh yeah,
and just the aesthetic of it. I mean, you look like you walked out of Mad Max or something with this thing. One thing to note though is it was actually made by Mattel and not Nintendo, so it's one of those things they outsourced and said, "Hey, we got the hottest selling quote unquote toy in the market, but we honestly don't know how to make toys. Can you help us out, Mattel?" And they're like, "Sure, we'll make an overcomplicated glove that requires 3 sensors to stack around your TV." So it had 3 sensors you put on the TV. They had long dangly wires, and that was essentially like the grandfather of the Wii as far as sensors and motion control, stuff like that. Obviously well ahead of its time. Great concept, just not the best execution.
No. I did used to wear it to school. Anybody else? Just kidding. I never did. No, I never did.
I mean, nobody messed with you for sure. Yeah. I'm sure absolutely nobody messed with you.
It still looks
What'd you
amazing.
Say? Why don't you come say that to my Power Glove?
I've been trying to find one of these new, like not new in the box, sorry, but like in box form. For a while. They're just so expensive now, but we don't have ours anymore, but it's just so cool, even though it did not work well.
I mean, pretty much.
I still want your jacket that you have with the Macho Man and the Power Glove.
It's pretty sweet. Other things that Nintendo did better than Sega. So this was Sega's introduction to the light gun. Obviously, it's a plain old Jane gun. Came out for their Master System. The Zapper, even though it was old and dated, still looks, by comparison, I mean, you just hold them side by side. I think most people are going to vote for the Zapper. Brighter colors, better, ergonomics with that neck design. So they got to win there. Sega tried to take it up a notch with their light guns for the Genesis. So they came out with the Menacer. You guys familiar with the Menacer?
Mm-hmm.
It's got that edgy name.
It does. I forgot that was the actual name of this product. That's incredible.
This thing was unique in that it came apart multiple ways. Like you could have an individual handle. You could have one with a butt. You could have the scopes and the eye pieces and things like that.
He is so
happy
right now.
And then, of course, Super Nintendo with the Super Scope. So Super Scope, same vein, just less ability to interchange and, change the design aesthetic. So, again, limited game use. There was probably 10 good games, 20 light gun games out there for both systems. But, for every good thing Nintendo did, there's also things like the laser scope. You guys familiar with the laser scope?
Yes, dude.
So
this was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in the meeting where somebody said, hey, I know how kids want to play games. They just want to scream fire over and over and over again at the TV set. Yeah, it's cool that it works, but you would instantly, hate that purchase or hate that product like 10 seconds after you did it. Unless you have some sort of mental
first start.
Speech impediment where you can only say like 5 words. That's not going to be something that's going to go for
definitely. I didn't have the laser scope, but I had something like that as a kid. It was its own standalone thing that played games on a little flip down, like see-through screen like that. I remember
you're talking probably about the Tiger Electronics red something. I forget what it's called, but it's basically a little bitty tiny screen that looks similar like this. You played Tiger Electronic games on with one eye.
It had Virtua Fighter. I remember it was and it was extremely uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely,
very uncomfortable. But I thought it was so cool.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we got suckered into, again, marketing. You look at it, you're like, oh my God, this looks like the future. This looks amazing. And the actual nature of playing games on it, you're like, oh.
I can tell you exactly how this happened at the house, though. You're like, smile on your face. Fire, 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 fire. I said fire.
For the love of God, fire.
Yeah.
And, God help anybody that had like a strong Boston accent or something like that. Fire, fire, fire. Just,
pretty much.
Obviously it wouldn't work. But as later years went on, Nintendo as a whole really started realizing that, hey, we got to do something about Sega. They're eating up our market share. They're, capturing the teenage edgy youth, so to speak. So we got to do stuff. So they started advertising more towards the arcade side of things, which this is a terrible arcade advertisement, by the way, but it's garnering to that, hey, you don't have to go to the arcade. Sega's got arcade games, so do we. I just want to point out something like I've never seen a Street Fighter arcade cabinet with a control deck configuration like this. I've seen all sorts of terrible chop jobs and conversion cabs. I ain't ever seen one that looked like this, let alone one that was in a national magazine advertisement. So whoever proofread this definitely was, looking at the clock on a Friday afternoon at 3:30 and that's good enough.
Yeah.
And not to be outdone, though, Super Nintendo also said, hey, we can be edgy too. We can have Paul Rudd, the infamous never aging Paul Rudd. So they hired him.
Decide to step up to this kind of power, this kind of challenge, this kind of flying, crashing feeling. When you decide to get serious, there's only one place to come, the games of Super Nintendo. No one else creates this kind of experience, because no one else creates these kinds of games. Now you're playing with power, superpower.
That is
superpower.
Fantastic. I heard that's what got him the role in Anchorman.
Oh, 100%. He's like, do you want me to read for this role? And they're like, nah, we seen that SNES commercial, man. Like you're acting, your experience with those games on that drive-in theater.
Hilarious. I did not remember that at all. That's fantastic.
Yeah. But I mean, slowly but surely they started doing that. And of course, if you're familiar with the history of Sega, Sega was its own worst enemy, and Sega Japan and Sega of America were at odds, and they started fighting internally, and basically they were their own demise. But not before Sega, again, really trying to milk a product for its entire lifespan. Came out with some other interesting peripherals towards the end of the product life cycle. So there was the Sega Nomad. Either one of you guys have the Nomad or
did not have the Nomad,
but
yes, it was a great idea.
Your battery's died in 2 seconds, but it's well worth that 2 seconds.
Yeah, I mean that was the thing.
It
actually played
the games.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a portable home console. It wasn't the Game Gear and the Game Boy where they tried to
I had this thing
create the Sega Genesis and the Nintendo games, on a different scale.
I have a great Game Gear versus Game Boy story that I've told Adam before. I remember I got a Game Boy for Christmas one year, and it was the original one, that didn't have any color. And I remember my dad. So it was obviously at the time when the Game Gear had already come out. And I remember my dad watching me play it Christmas morning, and he was like, "That's what we got you?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's the Game Boy. That's what I wanted." And he goes, "That looks terrible." He's like, "They don't make anything better than that." He's like, "Yeah, it's like a little dots on a screen." And I was like, "It's the Game Boy, Dad." And he took it from me, and he's like, "No, they got to make something better than that." And we got in the car the day after Christmas and went to the store, and he took it back. And he's like, "What else do you got?" And they showed him the Game Gear, and he goes, "Yeah, we'll take that thing."
Not good enough for my boy.
Yeah.
It was like, I know, it was very like.
Were you happy with the trade?
No, I was happy with the Game Gear. I mean, I already had a Sega at the time.
Yeah.
And I loved Sonic. So when I was like, wait, I don't know if I knew about the Game Gear or not. When I saw that, wait, I can play Sega or Sonic in the car, I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'll take that. I'm not going to complain.
Yeah. Well, let's show exactly what Jordan's talking about as far as the quality differences. So this is your Game Boy.
You can have all the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game Boy. It's portable. It's in stereo.
And it was portable.
Interchangeable. Plus, Game Boy comes with the outrageous.
That's so funny. Back in the day when stereo was a selling point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I know.
Blow your opponent away.
He blew him away with his finger again with those lightning bolts.
Yep.
I remember trying to play Tetris on that thing at night, and of course you can't freaking see it.
Yeah.
So you had to have the little light.
The magnifying lens.
Yeah, magnifying light deal. You're like, there we go. Yeah, that was a mess. Took them forever too. It's like they got the color. None of them had a backlight forever.
Yeah.
Oh,
basically, Basically to make the Game Boy operational.
That's all you needed. Yeah.
Yeah. Almost like the Tower of Power. You had to overpower this thing with accessories. You had to have a magnifying glass. You had to have the light. You had to have speakers, all sorts of stuff. Did I love my Game Boy? Absolutely. Was it an absolute nightmare trying to play in between the streetlights in a car ride type of thing? So I was like hugging by the window, and you're playing a game, streetlight. Oh, I can see what's going. And darkness, and streetlight, and darkness, and streetlight. That was the best that I could hope for until my parents were able to get a knockoff version of whatever monstrosity this was. Good thing about the Game Boy, though, it was much more forgiving on battery life than the Game Gear. So
100%.
the original Game Boy, 15-hour battery life, 4 AA batteries, and then you got media hogs like the Game Gear, a little more powerful, 8 batteries for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
This is the best way not to get your license on the first try.
And this is the best way to get video games.
Now get
Sega Channel, over 75 games a month for your Genesis machine. No lines, no limits, no late fees, just unlimited play on your TV. Sega Channel, less than $15 a month. Call your cable company now. Sega Channel, the only way to get it is to get it.
So actually, I clicked on the wrong one. So that's obviously the Sega Channel, and not the Game Gear advertisement. But again, that's going back to like Sega always trying to be like innovative. Did either one of you guys have experience? Because I only know one person growing up that ever had the Sega Channel.
I did not.
Dude, I didn't even remember that.
Did it just show gameplay videos?
No. So what it was it worked over your cable company. So you would literally have to, it'd be like almost buying HBO or something. So your parents would have to call the cable company, subscribe to the Sega Channel as a monthly service. It would coax connect to your Sega, and you could download and play, or I say download, you could play games through the system, and there was like 70 games on there.
Just blew his mind.
What?
Yeah, it was Xbox Live before Xbox Live, or Game Pass, or any of this existed.
Stuff.
That doesn't seem like that was possible back then.
See, I didn't even have cable, so that should tell you something.
And another thing that like Sega tried to push was they actually tried to do dial-up. I say tried, they did. They just didn't bring it to the American market. So they did dial-up internet multiplayer games for the Genesis with a modem for the Brazilian and Japanese market.
Really?
So again, going way ahead of its time. I'm like, Dreamcast failed in America because we didn't have enough internet then, and that people were doing modem connections to a Sega Genesis, 5 years prior, which is absolutely insane.
That is crazy. Yeah, I didn't know that. I knew the Dreamcast had internet connection, which
Saturn
was still even before its time. Like, but yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Did not remember that, but that's incredible. I would have totally wanted that if I had cable back in the day.
Yeah. And then, of course, another on the failing last legs of Sega, really trying to milk it for all it's worth, was the CDX. So this is kind of one of those things like a caveman having a lighter. Like, it was a Sega Genesis, it was a Sega CD, and it was a portable CD player. Like, it was an iPhone before an iPhone, because you either had a Sega Genesis, you were the lucky rich kid if you had a Sega Genesis and a Sega CD early on. And if you had a portable CD player on top of that, then by God, your dad's a doctor or something like that. Kids didn't have that. So to have them all in one compact, portable, thing was truly remarkable. That being said, didn't know a single kid that had one because all my friends were poor.
No,
I never saw that.
And they had the JVC version as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So
but no, definitely did not. Do I want one now? Yes, I do.
Oh, absolutely. It's a sleek looking device for sure. And you could fit it in your 90s pants that had the oversized pockets like the Jinko jeans and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah. And other innovative products. So the TV tuner for your Game Gear. So the Game Gear, biggest downfall for it, obviously it had the color, better sound, and everything like that. Battery life was rated 3 to 5 hours. I don't think I ever had anything close to that. It was always like 2 hours max. And that was for 6 AA batteries.
I know, that's insane.
Yeah. So you were playing Sonic or NBA Jam or Mortal Kombat for a little while, and then boom, dead.
Yep.
So it's like, you got to buy that wall adapter, or you got to buy rechargeable AA batteries, or just all sorts of crazy stuff. So,
did you have the TV tuner?
I did not have
I did. I did.
You
have
did?
That.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
Did you get any local channels? Because that's obviously one of those things. Is it's only going to be as good as.
See, that's the thing. We didn't have cable, so this was like a really cool thing at my house.
A TV in your room.
Yeah. Oh, sweet. I remember it actually working pretty decently well. But yeah, it's still funny. But then of course you got to put it in a wall, so because you're not going to last more than a couple of shows that you're watching. So.
Yeah, ahead of its time. Like I said, you got to watch color TV and a portable TV on a 2.5-inch screen, I think it was.
Yep.
And of course, Game Boy, another innovative thing. Game Boy essentially invented the selfies, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you realize it or not,
it's true.
The Game Boy Color camera that came out later, but basically the Game Boy camera was like half a pixel as far as quality. It's like. Calling it potato quality, image quality would be a compliment. So yeah, it tried. Did it succeed? No,
images
not
were
so much.
Awful.
Yeah,
it pretty much looked like sonogram pictures.
Basically, not too far up.
Yeah, it really did.
Yeah, but the Game Boy obviously went on to do exceptionally numbers, and it evolved into 10,000 different variations of the Game Boy Pocket, Game Boy Color, Game Boy DX. It just kept growing and growing, and it became just the synonymous handheld device. Game Gear was great in concept. Nomad was next, but after that, Sega just really didn't do the handheld thing anymore. They tried to focus specifically on the Saturn, the 32X. Those failed miserably. Tried one last time with the Dreamcast, but we all know how that went.
Yeah.
The Dreamcast was such a sweet system, though, too.
It was. And then looking at sales figures, so this gives you an idea of just how dominant Nintendo was, and then just how quickly Sega came to their neighborhood. So 7.5 million units sold in April of 1990 to March 1991 alone, just of the NES console. So that is crazy because you got a Game Boy that's also selling 4 million. You got another console that's launching, the very next year. I mean, just absolutely insanity when it comes to how much, they were selling. Like, there was retailers that wouldn't even entertain the idea of bringing a Sega, system or games to their, display sections, because they're like, first of all, Nintendo will cut us off, which is, a scary thing. If you're selling this much product as a retailer, you don't want to get cut off from Nintendo. So, I mean, Sega had their work cut out for them, and they eventually, made up some headway. The Sega numbers, a little bit different, not as crazy, but just to see how quickly they went from 500,000. Again, that was those early stages of them having Altered Beast as the pack in, having a very laissez-faire marketing campaign where everything was just like, meh, we sell games too. And then they changed with the edgy content. Boom, 1.5 million the next year, 3 million, 7.6 million, 13.5 million, 17.5 million. Just keeps growing. So short time frame, they went from less than 1% market share to 65% market share, overthrowing Sega entirely. I mean, just absolute insanity how quickly somebody essentially came out of left field and put Nintendo on the ropes.
Yep. And it's crazy too how much they got in their own way, Sega. I don't think it's a great idea to give a 32X to the U.S. market right when they announced the Sega Saturn. Just a thought. So, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, like I said, it was back to Sega being their own worst enemy, whereas Sega of America and Sega of Japan, two conflicting things. One thing is the silicone chip that was in the Nintendo 64. So they approached Sega first and foremost, and they said, absolutely, we want to do this. 64 bits, that's amazing. And they took it over to Sega Japan. Sega Japan says, no, we don't want to do this.
Yeah. Dude,
the engineers just said, we can't agree to terms. So the company went elsewhere, and they knocked on Nintendo's door, and they came out with the Ultra 64, which turned into the Nintendo 64. Sony came and knocked on Sega's door, said, hey, let's do a joint thing. We want to do video game stuff. And Sega said yes. Went over to Sega Japan. Sega Japan says, we don't want to do that. We
don't need them.
Yeah, Sony's a competitor in our eyes. So they turned them away. Again, they went over to Nintendo, tried to do something with Nintendo, said, hey, we're better off by ourselves. And now they control the market share. It's just, what could have been how a couple of unique decisions by certain individuals changed the entire landscape of what video games is today. It's insane. I can't talk. Sorry.
Could you imagine what it'd be like if either Sega or Nintendo said yes to Sony? Like, that'd be.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing. Like, we'd be playing 100% different things than we are now. I mean, the landscape, the game, everything would be different. Like, for the better or worse, we'll never know because hindsight 2020, and we can't see the future. But
I will say that. No, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, it just went from Sega just being the king, dethroning the champ Nintendo, just disappearing off the face of the earth so quickly with the Genesis and the failure of the 32X and the Sega Saturn.
Yep. They at least went out with a bang.
Yeah.
The Dreamcast, we still talk about this. I can't believe it was $199, which I understand back then that was, different, but I meant that's still crazy. And for what it did.
Dirt cheap.
Yeah. It's like one of the biggest collections I have. And dude, the arcade games that are on there. I mean,
for perspective. So the Saturn, we talked about the failure, $399 was the launch point of that. Sony was like $299 for their PlayStation. So right out of the gate, it was dead in the water for the American audience. If you were a diehard Sega, you were still like, no, like that's $100 more, and I'm still expecting mom and dad to, pay for it at that time. So I had to wait until it was clearance, and that's how I got in on the Saturn myself. But yeah, just pricing again, Sega being a home console arcade system, being ahead of its time with the modem and the connectivity. I knew two people that had internet access when the Dreamcast was coming out.
Good old Fantasy Star Online, dude. Some of the exclusives still that it has on there is incredible. But like, if you guys have never had a Dreamcast, like I said, I could go into this, but it's once again, I got the console literally just to play Marvel vs. Capcom 2 originally. I went to the it was like the best arcade port. So I used to play it all the time at the arcade and actually go to tournaments. And I was like, I need something to practice at home. And so I remember I got that. Then as I got older and older, I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe all the games that I missed out on this thing. And now it's one of my biggest collections. But
we did a video like a year and a half ago or something about the Dreamcast. We did one about the Dreamcast, and then we did one about the what game? The Tony Hawk's game.
Which is great because he was in shock.
Yeah, so the remake of the Tony Hawk games that just came out for PS4 and Xbox and all that.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to compare it, and Adam was like, well, I still have the old ones on Dreamcast. So we plug it in on Dreamcast, and we're sitting there looking at it, and I was like, this looks better than I remember.
Yeah,
I was like,
dude,
hold on,
it
this
holds up
isn't that
pretty
bad.
well.
Like,
Yeah.
we were just shocked at how well
The Dreamcast better was far superior to the PlayStation version.
Yes.
I was
It
the
was so
converted
good.
PlayStation kid at that point.
Yep, same here. Yep.
And I bought the Dreamcast later on, but like I just felt so burned with the Saturn and everything. So when I had my Dreamcast, I was very hesitant to buy games for it. Like I had it, and I was like, I'll stick with PlayStation. I mean, they're all the same price regardless. But it was like, unless it's an exclusive title like Sonic or something, I was like, I'll probably play it on my PlayStation. And I bought the first Tony Hawk on the PlayStation for that reason.
Same. Dude, but it's also funny to talk about because you mentioned this on Sega CD about how easy it was to do the CDs. I love it how Dreamcast is like, we're going to do this. So it's so hard for people to do any sort of copyright stuff with this.
Yeah.
If it ends
That
up
lasted
being
like 5 seconds.
Yeah, the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
Anyways.
It was what it was.
Yeah. Good final console at least. So
yeah.
Yep.
So when it was all said and done, if you guys had any leanings one way or the other, go ahead and rattle off. Were you Team Sega, Team Nintendo? Were you both? Were you indifferent?
Yeah.
It's such a hard decision because, like I said, I grew up with a Sega. So I mean, until I was in my teenage years, I probably would have told you, oh, Sega, absolutely, just because that's what I had and what I played the most since it was at my house. But like looking back on it, man, like there's games to this day that I think I would be more likely to play from Nintendo, like because I'm really into JRPG games and Nintendo had a lot of them, and there's tons that I missed just because I didn't own a Nintendo.
Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI,
and
Final
so
Fantasy
like.
IV. Earthbound, yeah.
I think I'm gonna have to say Sega just because that's nostalgic to me. That's what I remember playing.
Yeah, because I could say both and do the easy answer, but the truth is I'm trying to focus on when I was a kid. While I had both, and now I love both. It's just that at the time, since the NES was my first system, I was still Team Nintendo, even having both, if that makes sense. But looking back, there was reasons to have both. It's just, we were kids. We didn't have like the funds and understand all that, but yeah.
I mean, if money was no object, I think almost all kids would have been team both or whatever.
Yep.
I started out Team Nintendo, and then, like I said, I got won over with the marketing and just, Sonic the Hedgehog and some of the arcade titles that came over. Side-scrolling beat-em-ups I was always a sucker for. Sega had more. So I quickly jumped ship to Team Sega, stayed on Team Sega for pretty much most of my, junior high, middle school era age. So I would say I was definitely Team Sega and, rode that hard until even the Dreamcast came in. Like I said, I bought the Dreamcast, but I was still a little burned with how I was treated with the Saturn and 32X debacle. So I was like, okay, I'll hesitantly remain waving this Team Sega flag, but also mowing yards like crazy so I can buy more Sony PlayStation games because I think this is probably, just going to be as good.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember feeling so cool at school when I don't remember what year it was. I mean, it was like around when the Nintendo 64, maybe a year after actually, when it like came out. And I remember I wanted one so bad, even though I had a Sega. And I think I had the PlayStation at that point, actually. So it was a little while after the 64. But yeah, I just remember I saved up for like the longest time. My mom did this thing where she was like, you're going to get $5 for your school lunch every week. And you're going to get $5 every month for this. Like, and she was trying to teach us how to like budget our money. And some of it was for like, oh, this is what you're supposed to save so you can buy clothes for school next year. And I was like, okay, anything that's not for school lunch, I'm throwing that into the whatever I want fund. And so I saved that, I remember. And then I asked for my birthday. I was like, I don't want anything for my birthday. I just want the whole, like, everyone to just give me like $10 or something a piece or whatever. Like, and I remember that year for my birthday, I had like just gotten the PlayStation, but I remember my grandma, we had a tradition where every year after the day after my birthday, she'd take me and we'd go shopping for something, and she'd give me a little extra money, and I'd be able to use whatever money I got for my birthday. And I remember I walked in and I was like, I want a Nintendo 64. And I remember just feeling so cool because when kids at school would talk about games, like, yeah, I got a Nintendo 64 too. And like, you got a Sega, a PlayStation, and a Nintendo 64? And it's like yeah.
I can't buy games for them, but
yeah,
I got
no,
them.
I can't.
The struggle was real there.
Yeah. I got Star Wars Pod Racer, and that's what I got. But but I can play that, and I just remember feeling so happy, like I said, like I saved up for so long, and it was just like, I'm getting that Nintendo 64. This is gonna be great.
Paul, appreciate the super chat. This is still giving my edge to Nintendo since they were my fondest memories. Super chat for diapers. I appreciate that because kid just likes to ruin those diapers when I put them on them. But that's what kids do.
Go through them real quick.
Yeah, but if I had to end on one final note for you guys, let's just go ahead and just pick a memory. Jordan, you just kind of did it, so I'll defer to Adam. But singular memory that stands out from that time period of my life was Mortal Kombat and Mortal Kombat Monday when it released. I was the first kid in the neighborhood and the first kid at school to get Mortal Kombat for my Sega Genesis because it came out on September 13th. My birthday was on the 18th, and my parents, we were poor, so when we went to town, quote unquote, it was a to-do, it wasn't just like, hey, we're gonna get in the car and go to town real quick. No, it was like, hey, we're going to town like once or twice a month tops, So I was like, hey, this game comes out today. I know my birthday's, on Friday or Saturday or whatever, but it comes out today. Can't we get it? And they're like, well, we're going to town, so if it's in stock, yes. Lo and behold, just piles of them because it just global release. Bought it, had it, played, until like 2:00 in the morning. Went to school the next day. There's another one of those instances where I got caught playing the game after bedtime, and I was just an absolute zombie at school. But I remember specifically sitting there and having one of the rich kids in school whose dad was a doctor talking about, yeah, my parents are gonna get me Mortal Kombat over the weekend. It's gonna be great. I'm like, oh, you gotta wait till the weekend, huh? I'm like, I got it right now, sucker. It just, one of those few times you can hold a chip on your shoulder on the schoolyard because you feel supreme and special over somebody for one moment in your lifetime. I'm sure that guy's like a multimillionaire now, but man,
but you had Mortal Kombat first.
Yeah, I had him for that long.
Yeah, I mean, I got two memories, but one's a little bit later, so I'll kind of save that one. But like, I think for me, like what was huge, Mortal Kombat was probably the second big. There's actually three. This is hard. I'm gonna still stick with Street Fighter 2, and the reason why is because like I went to the arcade a lot, and when that came out, that was just the coolest thing. My brothers and I used to literally just sit there, Hadouken. You just thought it was so like you wouldn't stop it. You're like, whoever gets that fireball there first wins. And but dude, it's crazy. We still have that. The box for that, it was like $70 back then, which is insane. And people talk about price of games. I mean, it's crazy thing.
They've always been stupid expensive.
Yeah,
we showed that
crazy.
That Nomad ad where the games were $59.99, $69.99. I mean, that's been pretty much the standard for a long time. So
it's crazy. It's inflation hasn't really messed with the price of gaming.
And I think the reason why that was such a big deal though is because most games at our household, you're kind of passing around the remote sort of thing. It's the first one you're like, hey, let's have a little, and obviously the game's amazing too. But yeah, that was a good memory. So,
Well, I think we did a poll at the very beginning of the stream, and it looks like the results were split as to be expected. But the lenience was basically a 60-40 split in favor of Team Sega. So it looks like people that grew up in our age bracket and demographic for the most part, I say most part, in a small margin, 60% versus 40%, preferred Team Sega over Team Nintendo. But, as time went on, obviously, Nintendo ended up coming out the victor on that and then losing a whole nother battle in itself entirely. But still going strong to this day, so that's great.
I mean, I love the Switch. It's one of my favorite systems. They're still doing
fantastic system.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, it has been 1 hour and 20 minutes. Is there any closing thoughts you would like to give on Team Sega versus Team Nintendo, or anything you would like to plug about your channel, about your social media, so people know where to find you guys?
No.
I mean, we just
find us.
We love video games. Nintendo, Sega, it was all good. No, but
I love both. I really do. Yeah.
I mean, I know, Doug. I mean, I know this is going on your channel. I mean, if you guys want to come check us out at Complete Geek TV, that would be awesome. We try and do.
They make great content. It's better than my content. So if you could leave my content and go to their content,
I don't know about that. We have this. It's almost more of a problem than it even benefits us, because I think a lot of people don't understand. We're like, let's make everything we make look like a movie, but it might not be as informative as what people usually do on YouTube. But yeah.
It's the stuff I like, so I greatly appreciate you guys going that extra mile. It's something that is lacking on the platform, in my personal opinion. So I appreciate people that have that similar mindset where they want to do that extra and give that extra visual experience instead of going, "Hey, look at this game, it's great."
Yeah,
and that's it.
We do appreciate everyone watching, though, because we were super excited to start this and just kind of geek out. Doug and I kind of geek out weekly, it seems like, about just random stuff. We're like, we should just start talking about this. So
So this week the topic was Sega versus Nintendo. Next week will be an entirely different topic, 80s and 90s related. So we're not going to just do the same old song and dance where we talk about video games. We'll talk about toys, talk about pop culture, collectibles, you name it, because there's so much glory, goodness of the 80s and 90s, and there's really just a plethora of information and media out there, and a lot of that maybe escaped your mind over the years. So hopefully we can jog your memory banks and take you down a stroll down memory lane. So that's the goal. That's the aspiration for We Grew Up Better.
Yeah.
So until next time, everybody, hope everyone has a great weekend. If you're around the St. Louis area, I'll be at Mo Game Con this Saturday. So come say hi if you like me, or punch me in the gut if you don't. We'll call that good. Yeah. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.